Welcome to the show. It's Monday. It's a brand new week. It's IB Nation Sports Talk, and we, Vince, DeDario, are 2 years old today. How exciting is that? I've meant to bring my cake and light a candle. I forgot to do that.
Well, we can cheers each other. I bet you have a drink. Cheers.
There you go.
There you go.
Ice water. Ice water in our veins. That's
there you
what
go.
It is. We've got a lot that we're going to talk about today. Appreciate you. I made a post on the Champions Lounge, and we, had some feedback and stuff like that. And definitely appreciate everyone who has made these last 2 years a lot of fun, a lot of adventure. Starting with one of my number one guys, Vince DeDario. We were joking there for a little stretch a while back about who was the number one co-host, who was the number two co-host. And sometimes either you or Jesse, neither one of you was in the top two.
That's fair.
But
it's fair.
In all seriousness,
I'll eat it.
Could not do this day in and day out with both Vince and Jesse, and appreciate Ryan as well, for his new contributions to the show. He just kind of came on a couple of months ago, and he does the Tuesdays now and all that kind of stuff. But I tell you what, man, 2 years has just flown right by. I don't know about you.
I'm shocked that it's been 2 years, to be perfectly honest with you. It feels like yesterday that you called me and told me what happened at the radio station. And then like 5 minutes later, Brian calls me and he's like, "Do you think Sean would be interested in coming over?" And I'm like, yeah, I do. It was a whirlwind, man. And then all of a sudden, like bing, bang, boom, we got a show in the evenings. And it was a chance for me because of school and everything else, chance for me to be on a little bit more often. And then, of course, rekindling our co-host relationship that has been going since 2004.
We've had an on-again, off-again relationship since 2004. That's right. In terms of, working relationships, anyway, I guess. So,
Yep.
Man.
And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you've taught me everything I know. So,
yeah, that's
I'm not sure if you want to take credit for that or not, but yeah.
Yep. Sean said, "Did you ever think you'd get to do a Notre Dame talk show with your son? Seems like that's pretty awesome." It is. And that was never, ever part of the plan, back in the day. He always kind of had his thing. He knew from the time he was pretty young, actually, that he wanted to be an engineer. I guess he just always had that kind of analytical math brain. He knew he wanted to be an engineer, and that was always his thing. And so I never thought that, one wisely on my part, I steered him away from this business, because this business is, very unpredictable, this media business, which is why I landed here to begin with. And and about the path before I was even at the last stop and what it took to get there. And there were just so many curves and forks in the road and everything else.
This is true.
So like doing a show a couple of days a week with Jesse was never thought that would ever happen.
Yeah. It almost happened like accidentally. I mean, he would come on every now and again on the radio show, right?
Well, the reason, just like with you,
at
the last stop I was at on the radio show, what had happened was, and I think I talked about this when we talked about, so I was co-hosting a radio show, and one day the boss comes to us and says, "Hey, you're gonna keep doing the afternoons, but you're gonna do it solo. And Darren, you're gonna go to the morning show, and it's all gonna be solo. And neither one of you is going to have a co-host. Neither one of you is going to have a producer." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? What is?
That was
awesome. This even gonna work?"
It was awesome.
So the next thing I know, I'm doing monologues, in the first segment of the afternoon show, like literally, anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on what I did come up with that day. I'm doing a monologue to start off the first segment of the show, booking guests as much as possible. Brian was one of them. And Brian and you and I all go back to a different stop where we all met at a different website in a different universe. But then second hour of the show, rapid fire. And how am I going to do rapid fire if I'm doing a solo show? So it was you, it was Bobby, and remember, like for the people who have been with this show since day one, Bobby came over here for a couple of months.
Bobby and his technical difficulties.
Yeah, man, like that's talk about a saga. And then Jesse, I think Jesse started off. It was like you did a couple days a week. I think Bobby maybe did 1 day a week, and Jesse did 1 day.
Yeah, that sounds right.
When we first started off, and then I think Bobby had like a bowling league or something like that, and
it's always something.
And Jesse started doing more, but Jesse was doing rapid fire back in the at least 1 day a week during the radio days as well. The three of you were doing like 1 day a week, and every once in a while, some other guys like Angelo DiCarlo, Chuck Freebie, some of the local guys, did some rapid fires and stuff like that. I think Evan Sharpley did 1 or 2 rapid fires with me, but it was mostly you three guys, and that's we kind of carried that over here, and obviously it has morphed since then.
We are,
and here we are 2 years later.
Love
what
it.
A blast!
We got a good thing going. Let's just keep the train moving.
We do,
and might be some adjustments here and there, but you got to adjust here and there when you're doing, can't keep
that's life in media these days, man. Like you've got to be able to adjust and roll with the punches as much as possible. I mean,
so true.
Brian is obviously, above me, going through a lot of stuff now with everything with the sale of SI and things that have happened since then. And yep. DK, do appreciate the super chat. He says Jesse wears J shorts. All right.
Was that jorts?
Jorts. Maybe that's what that's supposed to be. Jorts. Maybe that
might be jorts.
Yep.
I could see Jesse in a pair of jorts.
I could too.
Yeah, I could definitely see that out. I mean, out mowing the lawn in his jorts and a cutoff. I could see that being Jesse for sure.
Yep. Yeah. DJ forgot about Bobby, and Bobby.
Well, if he's listening, he's forgettable. It's
he's very forgettable. He's yet another guy who I met. He works at one of the local TV stations here in town, and he used to be kind of one of the. He does some directing. Kind of. He's more of he's a behind the camera kind of guy, directing, producing, things like that. And he produced one of the like the football pregame show at Notre Dame, and so we would see each other all the time, and we sat next to each other. Where we really got to know each other is when I was at the other website. We sat next to each other basically at Notre Dame men's basketball games, and that's where we really kind of got to know each other, covering Notre Dame men's basketball. But Bobby's a good guy, and you actually got me. He and I did a podcast called Two Guys Talking Sports Movies. We actually did. You did it. You filled in a few times during the COVID months, but we did 30 plus episodes together. And you mentioned it the other day, and they're still up. They're rolling around on iTunes.
They are.
And I listened to one the other day.
Did you?
Like, that was pretty good. We had some good times.
Yeah.
Back then, doing the old movies podcast. So
well played.
That was fun. So I did make a post on the Champions Lounge board. I need to blow this up so we can actually read it. But I was soliciting some input, like any new things that regulars might want. But Father David, he says, I love the interviews, even the one with the weird girl who clearly had never paid attention to the team she was supposed to cover.
That one was a train wreck.
Oh, that was an interesting one. But he also said that he likes it when we talk about the announcers and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay.
So we bring that up every now and then, obviously, in rapid fire, some of the different stuff.
Father David
with the announcers
is a loyal listener. He's been around since the beginning.
He is.
And for a man of the cloth, he comes hard at people. I mean, me in particular.
Yes.
But it's all fun and games. I think it's hilarious, frankly. But especially having gone to, a religious school pretty much my whole life growing up, to have a man of the cloth come at me like that is actually really fun.
Yes. Good sense of humor. He's not the sense of
Yes,
humor you would expect from, as you would
correct.
say, the
Agreed.
man of the cloth.
It's fantastic though. I love it.
Yep. Now this one is from Played Like a Champion today. He says, "I do a good job of summing up the latest news. You really have a gift for it." Now I never really thank you for one, but I never, I guess I never really saw that. So he says, "I would love it if every once in a while you could sum up news for what has happened with Notre Dame football over the last few weeks. Plus, some of us approaching 50 can tend to forget."
Hey,
Okay.
some of us that are closer to 40 tend to forget as well. So don't feel bad.
Yeah. And so I never really thought about summing up the news. And I guess maybe that's just something that acquired over time with all those many years working in radio, sports radio.
We did a nice little summary show. Was it Friday where you talked about like kind of what happened in the last week or so?
Yeah.
So that was good. Maybe that was fresh on his mind because we just did a show kind of like that.
Maybe so. I guess so, because we did. Yeah, we kind of like, here's what happened this week. Maybe we can start doing more of that, like he said, kind of at the end of the week as well as at the end of the month. That'll require me keeping track of things and remembering things. I'll have to keep track of things, I guess, a little bit better. He said he would also be thrilled if uniform numbers of the Notre Dame players were mentioned while discussing them. I think that's interesting because I know one reason I don't tend to, say numbers at all. It's probably because of my play-by-play background, because that's something that I was taught, like never say numbers, basically, right. Like as a radio play-by-play guy. Now on TV, it's different because you can actually see them, but I guess we could try to drop the numbers.
Yeah,
in there
I'm a big numbers guy, to be honest with you. So that is no problemo. I can definitely do that.
Right. Now, he also says it would be great if, say, Thursday, a post was created on IB where us non-live listeners could comment, agree, or disagree with someone's take on the show that would be discussed.
That's kind of like a recap type of show, and we could bring up people's, you know what? That has some merit to it. Especially if they disagree with Jesse, we can definitely bring that up and we can give him a hard time.
And then it's it's content that we can turn around, I guess, as well. Like if I if I did like one post toward the end of the week and say, here's what we discussed on Monday, here's what we discussed on Tuesday, and then just let people, kind of post what they want to post about it.
I like it.
Kind of thing. Yeah. It's easier to be able to turn it back around at this time of year when there's less going on. Once you get into the season, there's always stuff going on,
That is a good point.
Now let me take this out of here for a second. There was another one or two that was really good that I wanted to be sure to get to. But our first show was, the reason I remember the anniversary is because our first show was the day after Notre Dame beat Tennessee to go to the College World Series 2 years ago.
Yep. That was big news, big time news.
Yep. And so that was our first show, day after Notre Dame beat Tennessee. And Tennessee, in case you missed it, is actually back in the College World Series right now. And it's fun. I don't know how close attention you were able to pay to it over the weekend. You were probably doing, like camps or something, more important.
It's always
out
something
there. But NC State and Georgia are playing in their game 3 of their super regional tonight. Otherwise, the other 7 teams are in the College World Series field. Texas A&M, Virginia, Florida, Kentucky, North Carolina, Florida State, Tennessee have all advanced. So with NC State playing Georgia, basically the entire field is going to be ACC, SEC. So
no Cinderellas.
No Cinderellas this year.
Nobody to root for. That's what you're saying.
That's exactly right. There's no Notre Dame this year.
I mean, there's a Link Jarrett, I guess, connection that you
Link
can.
Jarrett's there.
You want to root for Florida State if that's in your wheelhouse. If that's the kind of thing you want to do. Right. I suppose you can. Now, wasn't this year? Was it it was last year that Florida State kind of struggled, right? His first year they struggled, and then this year they kind of came out like game busters.
Well,
right?
and that's the thing. They had apparently last year was the worst year in the history of Florida State baseball in his first season. And you're like, man, did Link lose his magic? But
right.
they had a lot of roster issues, I guess, and they turned it over. Chuck Ristano, who went with Jarrett from Notre Dame to Florida State as his pitching coach. He was the pitching coach here for several years. Remember,
Oh yeah.
Ristano went back to the Mickey Aoki years.
As I say, he was here for a couple regimes.
Yep, but he left and became the head coach at Navy this season.
Oh,
but,
I didn't know
Florida
that.
State, Link got him turned around, man, and they're elite. I don't know if he's going to win a national championship this year because you never know once they get to Omaha. But I've just got a feeling that guy's going to win a title here pretty soon.
Yeah, he's just so good. I mean, and
Yep.
Seeing what he did at Notre Dame and the amount of time that he did it, and then playing at such an elite level and all of these different things, like he's a really good coach. And then to see where Notre Dame is now, I think it makes you appreciate him even a little bit more. It's kind of the Pulmonary effect, right? I mean, you saw what Pulmonary did at Notre Dame, and you kind of took it for granted to a degree, and then he left, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, you really miss Paul.
Yeah, I'm not saying you've got to pull for Florida State.
No.
Because, I mean, basically Link is part of the evil empire now. So,
and that's fair. I mean, he was a Florida State guy in his bones when he came to Notre Dame. Now, obviously, when he's wearing a Notre Dame uniform, that changes things a little bit. But if Florida State ever came calling, you knew he was probably going to go.
Yeah, exactly. So this one is from, and I was just looking at the handle, Red Salmon Ghost. Interesting.
Oh, I like that.
Interesting handle, but I like that. He says it's hard to explain, but this show has a happy hour feel to it. There's a lot of serious and passionate talk, but it's done in an upbeat, laid-back way that helps me de-stress. I don't want to stop at a sports bar for a drink on my way home from work, but I imagine doing so relaxes people while they get to talk serious Notre Dame sports to wind down their day. Thank you very much. I think that's one of the highest compliments, really, that we could get, Vince. Because go ahead.
It's funny. I was going to say it's funny because when we first started doing shows together way back when in 04, 05 in that neighborhood, one of the things, and I remember the things you tell me, Sean, even though I'm getting old. But one of the things that you told me when we were first getting started, I mean, I had no experience doing any kind of talk radio or sports shows or anything like that. He's like, you're like, what you said to me was, all we want to be is like guys in a bar having a conversation about sports. That's what it needs to be. And I've always kept that kind of in the back of my mind. So that is an amazing compliment, because whether we vocalize it or not, like behind the scenes and talk about what we want the feel of the show to be, I think you and I have always kind of had that feeling about things, because that's what you taught me way back in the beginning, that's what it's supposed to be. It's just supposed to be guys having a conversation.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly it.
That's a huge compliment, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. Yep. So I appreciate it.
I mean, and that's what I was taught, when I was learning to do it. And, like as conversational as possible, you're hanging out, you're having fun, you're talking sports with your friends. That's, and that's always the feel.
That's the way,
that we wanted to have. And, I don't know how much people here listen to, like Dan Patrick's show, for example. I don't listen or watch as much anymore, but back in those days that you're talking about,
right,
that was one of the shows that I listened to. And then when he left ESPN and was doing his own thing, I think it got even better because he had a bigger group of guys with him. It's just guys hanging out together, talking sports. And that was kind of always, not that I was trying to be Dan Patrick, but that was just sort of the vibe that we were looking for.
Yep.
Well, and that's what, and that's to me, again, like when my, going back to what I was talking about when I was at the radio station for that year before I came here, when my boss told me, "Oh, you're going to do a solo show," it's just like, that's
not
my strength.
Yeah, that's not you though. I mean, you did it and it was good.
Like solo play-by-play to an extent is one thing, because you've got a game and you can just,
Sure. There's stuff to talk about. Sure.
Yeah.
But that's not where you shine though. Like you shine at propping people up, throwing comments to them, putting people up there and getting them ready. And that's where you shine. And then the back and forth, obviously. Yeah, that's because remember when we were doing the SS show, the Sean Steyer show back in the day, we would have 4 or 5 people on at the same time and kind of going back and forth and learning who to talk and who's not talking and not talking over each other and all of those different things, but just a lot of opinions.
That was a problem at some point, the talking over each other.
Yes.
It's just like people would all kind of sit there and then all of a sudden it would be like everyone would just try to talk at the same time.
And then it would just be like glares, like, dude, like, you know better.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, again, we appreciate everybody who's been a part of it for the last 2 years. Tell your friends. We can always hang out with more people here on the show. Whether it's the YouTube live show or the podcasts afterwards, all one and the same.
That's right.
So, and I get what what that guy was talking about with was Red Salmon Ghost. Because there are podcasts I listen to, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like just kind of, you listen to them. And not that you're part of the conversation, but like the de-stressing part of things. It kind of calms you down, just kind of hearing that conversation. So
100%
for sure. Appreciate it. Happy 2 years. Thanks again to everybody for being a part of it. Okay, let's talk some Notre Dame football. We got plenty to talk about today. The schedule. The schedule. What should a Notre Dame football schedule look like in the expanded playoff era? And we've had some people, I've seen some different posts on the Champions Lounge, people talking about, here's, should Notre Dame schedule this team in a home and home? Should Notre Dame schedule that team in a home and home? Like, what should this whole thing look like? And I don't know how much you've been thinking about this lately, but especially when Boise State got added to the schedule recently, it sort of got me thinking about it. And, you weren't on the show that day. Jesse was, and he wasn't that thrilled with it. It's like,
Boise State doesn't move the needle. Like it,
not a lot, but like in terms of group of 5 teams, there's probably not, even if they're not as good now, like it feels like that is a sort of made for TV kind of game. Notre Dame, Boise State. Again, even if Boise State's not as good as they were even 5-6 years ago, it's still a game that's going to move the needle more than really any team in the MAC, right?
Oh, 100% for sure. It would move. I know this is going to sound crazy. It would move the needle more for me if Notre Dame was going there and playing on the blue turf. Like, I think at least that's a bit of a spectacle, even though I think the blue turf is stupid. That's at least a spectacle. Like, it's something that you're not going to see a Notre Dame team do, very often, if at all, for that matter. Now, look, I also understand that the caliber of a Boise State team, they're going to be coming to Notre Dame. Like, I understand the hierarchy and all of those different things. But, as I'm driving to the stadium for the Boise State Notre Dame game, it's not like my blood's going to get pumping or my heart rate's going to get, a little deeper, that kind of a thing, a little faster. Doesn't really move the needle. It is an opponent they don't normally play, which I do like. It's something that we don't see. I always like when Notre Dame finds an opponent that they haven't, as long as it's not a 1AA opponent. I'm always excited when they're playing somebody they haven't played before. But, Boise State's at least a name, and you're right. I think they move the needle more than like a MAC school or something, or maybe a Conference USA even. So, I mean, okay, Boise State, let's go.
By the way, I texted you and Jesse this before the show, and
crazy.
we're gonna touch on it in rapid fire. Decaf. There is news out there that former Notre Dame baseball coach Paul Maneri is expected to be hired as South Carolina's new baseball coach, and it is noteworthy that South Carolina's athletic director Ray Tanner is their former baseball coach as well, and he and Paul. Pretty good friends from when they were coaching against each other back in the day when South Carolina was winning national championships about I guess it's 12 or 13 years ago at this point. But we'll touch on that in rapid fire a little bit
All right.
later. Very
I got
interesting. We'll
thoughts.
save it.
I got
We'll save it.
thoughts.
We'll save
All
it. We
right.
got football to talk about.
Okay. All right.
We got football to talk about. So I'm going to give you this year's schedule,
Okay.
next year's schedule, last year's schedule. And we're
Okay.
going to kind of look from a combination of attractiveness, ability to make the playoffs, how difficult you schedule the whole thing, which of the schedules you like the most. So this year, home games, Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, Louisville, Stanford, Florida State, Virginia. Road games, Texas A&M, Purdue, USC. Only 3 road games. I never really thought about it that way. But
it's interesting because you're about to say the neutral games, which is Georgia Tech, Army, Navy. I don't see Georgia Tech as a neutral game. I know it's not being played on their campus, but they play other games at the Georgia Dome or whatever their new stadium is called down there in Atlanta. That's an away game, man. Me personally, I look at that as away. That's not a neutral site to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're in Atlanta. I mean, it's a neutral site only because Georgia Tech doesn't play their home games in that stadium. I'll be curious to see a stadium that big, what percentage ends up being Notre Dame fans.
Well,
they're able to,
that's fair.
Pack some in there. So
that's absolutely fair. I feel like it's in the same city as the school that you're playing. That's not a neutral site game. My opinion, but yeah.
So those you said the neutral site. So that's this year's schedule. Last year you had Tennessee State, Central Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest as the home schedule. Pretty solid home schedule, obviously because of the fact that you had Ohio State and USC. The road games were NC State, Duke, Louisville, Clemson, Stanford. The neutral site game, of course, in Dublin was Navy. And then next year's schedule, the home games are Texas A&M, Purdue, Boise State, USC, Navy, North Carolina State, Syracuse, Arkansas, Boston College, Miami, and Pittsburgh are the road games. As of now, no neutral site games scheduled. Now, that's only 11 games right there. The one thing about next year is, as of now, Stanford is not on next year's schedule because this is the last year that Notre Dame and Stanford have on their contract. And of course, you've also got maybe a complication of the fact that Stanford is joining the ACC next year. So we don't know yet if Stanford is even going to be on next year's schedule. Now, we'll save that part of the conversation for a little bit later as well. But we're looking big picture. Which of these schedules do you like the best in terms of, again, attractiveness, especially from a home game standpoint, and competitiveness with the obvious goal of being in the college football playoff?
So from I want to watch that game standpoint, you know what I mean? Like, as a fan, last year's schedule is the best schedule of the 3, in my opinion. The problem with last year's schedule,
is that heavily weighted because you had Ohio State on it?
It's heavily weighted because of Ohio State, USC, and Clemson, because of the big 3 games.
Gotcha.
No doubt about it. It was top heavy, right? Now you can make a case. Obviously, they lost to Louisville, right? The Duke game was really good. NC State, everybody looked at as like a sleeper game, in that season. I just think that you can make a better case for last year's schedule being more difficult. I mean, it's really not even a conversation. It was more difficult than this year's schedule. There were more must-see games, in my opinion, on this schedule, and there was
which is interesting because you also had Tennessee State on the schedule,
and that's the drawback, right? Like, if there was a negative about last year's schedule, it's 100%. It's Tennessee State. I hated the fact that they played a 1AA team. I hated that. Was one of the things I used to hang my hat on, was that Notre Dame has never played a 1AA team. That was something I took pride in as a fan, and now you can't even say that anymore. That Notre Dame had never played a 1AA or FBS or whatever you want to call it, FCS, excuse me. I love that, and now that's gone, and that stinks. But as a whole, that schedule is still the best of the 3 years.
Interesting, because I think I like next year's schedule a little bit more. Now, granted, we still don't have it, but I mean, you've got 2 SEC teams on that schedule.
That's
because
true.
You're hosting Texas A&M, And remember Arkansas was supposed to be on the schedule during the COVID season, but that got booted. And so they're finally gonna begin that, going to Arkansas next year. You also go to Miami. I'd prefer it a little bit more. Again, Miami is still Miami, but what happened the last time Notre Dame went to Miami? It's not one that you can take for granted by any means, and they're supposed to be better by next year. And I mean, you're replacing both Northern Illinois and Miami, Ohio, essentially with Boise State and Navy. I'll take that trade-off any day of the week. Now, again, that's not the schedule that you're talking about that you liked. You're saying you like last year's as opposed to this year's. But, again, so like even if you look at last year, you're replacing Tennessee State and Wake Forest with Boise State.
Well, Central Michigan.
Or even NC State. Yeah, Central Michigan. There you go. So and again,
there's more Power 5 schools on there. There's no argument to be made there. I mean, you've got one Group of 5 team, which is Navy, and you're always going to have Navy. That's Navy will always be on the schedule, and they always should be on the schedule. And then you got Boise State as well. So you've got 2 Group of 5, whereas this year they've got 3 Group of 5, right? No, they've got 4 because you got Army, Navy, Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio. So you've got 4
group of 4. Yeah.
Group of whatever, however many
group of 5, I guess. Yeah.
In the group at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you got stuck. And again, like you can talk about, this is the 100-year anniversary of the 4 Horsemen and all that kind of stuff. But when you've got both Army and Navy and Northern Illinois and Miami, Ohio, it's just not ever going to be.
Yeah. I don't
attractive.
Look, I say this with the deepest respect for the MAC because I'm heading to a MAC school tomorrow morning.
Right.
But I don't ever want to have multiple MAC schools on the schedule if I'm a Notre Dame person. I don't. And this
and again, that's why I don't mind Boise State at all. And in terms, like I said, in terms of Group of 5 teams, I think Boise State is the most marquee program that you could have, whether they're that great right now or not. It's the most marquee program.
Well, and they've won a New Year's Six game.
Yeah,
Notre Dame can't say that in the past X amount of years, right?
Yeah. What Gonzaga's been to men's basketball, Boise State was for a good decade or so to that Group of 5 type level. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. I would much rather have a Boise State than any of the MAC schools, to be perfectly honest with you. And if you're going to have a MAC school on there, I think you should be cherry picking the top. Now, it's hard to project out when you make these schedules who's going to be at the top, who's not going to be at the top. But a Toledo, a Miami of Ohio, those have generally been the 2 top teams here for the last few years, and they've got Miami on there. You've got the Chuck Martin connection. I have no problem with Miami of Ohio being on the schedule. The problem that I have is the fact that you've got Northern Illinois on there as well.
Right.
And I think you could have done
stomach
better.
One. You don't want both.
Yeah. And look,
you 2 crazy ants coming over for Thanksgiving. Right. It's like there's only so much you can take.
Correct. Right? And look, I get the fact that you don't want to schedule 11 SEC teams on your schedule. Like I understand that you need some lower competition. The SEC teams do it. They play all kinds of garbage teams, right? Directional schools and everything else. I get it. But there are plenty of Group of 5 teams that you can schedule to where you don't just have to cherry pick out of the MAC because they're local. You know what I mean? Because it's the most local Group of 5 conference in the area. Like I get that, but I don't know. I just feel like they should expand out, and they did that with Boise State, and I'm actually cool with that.
Yeah. So big picture now, they're going. The playoff is expanding. These schedules were all built with a 4-team playoff model.
That's true.
Involved, and so you've got these high degree of difficulty teams like Ohio State, Texas A&M, Alabama's going to be on it in the future. Obviously, Michigan will rotate back on in the future. That was meant to counteract the fact that Notre Dame doesn't play in a conference championship game. So you needed to have
you have to hedge your bets a little bit.
You had to have that extra one because in any given year, USC can be pretty good. I mean, they were ranked a couple of years ago. They were obviously better than they were last year. They beat Notre Dame, obviously, a couple of years ago. Clemson, Florida State. You expect that you're going to get at least one quality opponent out of the ACC teams, the 5 ACC teams that you're going to play every year. It's going to, and like last year, you kind of got a little bit of a surprise when you got Louisville, but you also ended up with a couple of decent teams in NC State and Duke as well. But, again, I guess in terms of that big marquee team, do you think that they should continue to schedule those kind of opponents going forward with the goal of making a 12-team playoff and not a 4-team playoff? Because I've thought about this a couple of different ways. I'm curious to see what you think.
I mean, the question is one marquee game. Is that the specifics of the question?
One marquee game outside of obviously
the 5 ACC games, which could have a Clemson in there. Yeah. Which could have a Miami if they ever decide to be good again. It could be whatever, right? And
Florida
like you
State,
said, yeah, absolutely. I'm cool. I'm still cool with the ACC, makeup that they've got, because that's only 5 games. You still have 7 others to schedule, right? Now you go to the ones that you play every year: USC, Navy. Okay, now you're up to 7, right? So you've got 5 games left. So what is that? Basically, what does that 5-game schedule look like?
How do you build that?
Right. That's what it comes down to, right?
Like Michigan State and Wisconsin are going to be on the 26th schedule, for example. And Florida State, Miami, and USC will all be on that as well. So, like, in terms of
there TV you go. Now you've got some big,
it's pretty good looking schedule right there. Yeah.
Right.
So then, how you work the rest of the schedule around that,
right.
Like that kind of.
I would say how I would do it, because you got to have like a model, right? So my model would be 5 ACC, right? You've got USC, you've got Navy,
right?
So now I'm up to 7, right? I think, you look for now, because you got 5 games remaining, right? So I think what you do is you look for an upper echelon team, an SEC team, an upper echelon Big Ten team. I think you do 2 of those. I think that's what you aim for, or at least 2 from either or SEC, Big Ten. And it doesn't have to be Alabama. It doesn't have to be Michigan or anything like that. But I think
so 2 from the conference, but like maybe the middle of the conference,
wherever it happens to be. I don't care. Go get 2,
like Arkansas, for example.
Yeah,
Arkansas is going to be on with Texas A&M.
Absolutely.
So you've got 2 SEC. You've got one that theoretically should be higher and one that's going to be middle to lower tier. And I mean,
correct.
There was a time after they scheduled Arkansas when Arkansas was not that good that it was looking like they were going to be pretty good. And now they're looking like they're going to be awful again. And who knows, they might even have a new head coach by the time that game rolls around.
So I'm up to 9, right? So I've got the 7, which is the 5 ACC, the 1 USC, 1 Navy. And I know USC is a Big Ten, but that doesn't count towards the next tier of you got to play 2 either SEC and or Big Ten, right? So now I'm up to 9. So to round out your your next 3, I think this is where you can have a MAC school on there. I have no problem with 1 MAC school, right? Then I think you can get an upper echelon Power 5 like a Boise State. I mean, not Power 5.
Group of 5.
Yep. Yeah. So I think 1 group
Boise
of 5.
Boise State, Fresno State, maybe,
right.
Somewhere.
Yep. Absolutely. Like
even a Memphis potentially.
UAB is on the rise, with Dilfer down there, or somebody like that. Like,
well, I mean, look, I think that after you play Tennessee State and after you play Northern Illinois and Miami, Ohio in the same season, really, I think any of the group of 5 is up for grabs, right? Like,
fair.
you're not necessarily scheduling for marquee, so you fill it out with whoever you can get. And just like Jack Swarbrick has said, if like they get calls all the time with schools trying to schedule them, and that school's going to get a couple $1 million minimum to come in here and play Notre Dame. So it doesn't have to be from the top. It doesn't have to be a whatever the marquee group of 5 doesn't have to be whoever. Just get them on the. So I'd still rather see one of those other group of 5s outside the MAC than 2 MAC teams together in the same.
Yeah, I don't want 2 MAC teams at all. So I got 1 MAC, 1 group of 5, however you want to look at that, right? Not a lower one, but an upper one. And then my last one, And at this point, I don't care, but I want a low-level Power 4 team. A Northwestern, a Vanderbilt, an IU, a Purdue, one of those.
IU is supposed to be on the schedule here in a few years.
Like, and it could be one of those old rivals, like a Michigan State. It could be a Purdue, that kind of a thing. Like, that would be my last slot. You know what I mean? That wouldn't take up my 2 SEC/Big Ten, but it would be like a lower level. You could still say you're playing a group of 5 or you can still say you're playing a Power 4 team, but it would be a team that you're probably going to take out back to the woodshed and, call it a day. You know what I mean? So I only want 3 total group of 5 teams. Navy, a MAC, and then group of 5.
Whoever.
Upper echelon group of 5. Yeah. No more than 3. No more than 3.
You said a lot there. And
I know. And I was like writing it out as I was saying it, trying to come up with like a
I should have been writing it down as you were going.
Yeah.
So you're saying like 2 SEC teams, it doesn't matter what level SEC teams.
It could be 2 SEC, it could be 1 SEC, 1 Big Ten. Like, I would want them to be mid-level to up.
So let's look at it like, the Alabamas, Georgias, which Notre Dame has played before, Texas not that long ago.
Sure.
Ohio State. I mean, those are all perennial college football playoff.
Michigan would qualify.
Do you still want that kind of team in addition to the, to who we know that they're going to play? Do you want that kind of marquee game?
Yes, at least one.
Okay.
At least one. Because let's say you win all the other ones, you lose that big marquee game, you're still getting in the playoff, but you have to test yourself to a degree. Like, right. You can't put together, in my opinion, you can't put together a cupcake schedule, go 11-0 or 12-0, get into the playoff, and then get your doors blown off. You've got to test yourself.
You've got to find the balance of, like how much you're challenging yourself. And, but the other thing is the ACC has its, who Notre Dame's opponents are going to be years in advance, unless you're Miami, and Miami and their administration can't figure out the fact that, Notre Dame is supposed to be on our schedule, so we can't schedule frickin' Florida A&M this year. That aside, my point is that is made years in advance, just all these other schedules. So, like, you don't know what Miami or Florida State is going to be 5 years from now. And I mean, right now, we don't even know what Clemson is going to be 5 years from now, if they're going to be at that same standard, the way they're trending right now. So they can be, you can end up with a really good team. You could end up with a really average team is my point. So you still have to, I do think you still have to put a certain degree of difficulty in there so that you're not just walking by cupcakes, because part of this that's also out of Notre Dame's control is with these other conferences expanding the way they are, the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12 even, because of, as big as the Big 12 is going to be, they're not going to be probably as good as the Big 10 and the SEC, but they're all going to be more competitive. They're all vying for extra spots in the college football playoff. And so the fact that Ohio State, Alabama, whoever it happens to be, especially in the SEC and the Big Ten, you can't schedule so cream puff that you haven't played at least somebody who's in the upper, comparable to the upper fourth probably, or upper third of those other conferences, because at the end of the day, your resume is going to have to stack up with them as you're looking for bids and you're trying to be, wherever you are in the rankings, whether it's a 12-team format or not, you're still, you can't just have a bunch of walkovers on your schedule if you're Notre Dame.
Well, because, and then, look, if you're Notre Dame, you're an independent, you're not getting that automatic bid, all of those different things. Well, your resume, your strength of schedule, like, that's going to come into play against a 1 or 2 loss SEC or Big Ten team. Like, that's going to be a legitimate conversation if you play a cupcake schedule. So you have to challenge yourself, even if you're guaranteed to get in at 12-0, which Notre Dame probably would be, right? You got a chance of, even though you're hosting that first round game, you got a chance of losing if that's your first competitive game that you played all season long. And if you don't
Right.
happen to lose that one, you're going to lose the next week,
Right.
and so you have to at least challenge yourself. And you could put that list of schools together, and it would not be a difficult one. You could list the SEC schools. There's probably 4 or 5 teams that I would put perennially in that group that I would want to play. And there's probably 3 to 4 to 5 teams in the Big Ten that I would want to play perennially. You know what I'm saying? Like, you pick one from each of those, and then that is what you put in your schedule. And I think you can also project out to a degree. Look, Georgia's not going anywhere. Alabama's not going anywhere. Like, those are still going to be big name teams in 5 years or whatever the case may be when you're making the schedule. Michigan, Ohio State.
Well, and even if they're down a little
still,
bit, that's still going to get eyeballs.
but those are still marquee names.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? And you're still going to get
Exactly.
credit for playing and scheduling those games. You know what I mean? And so I still think you have to challenge yourself in the schedule. Now, again, I don't want the whole schedule to be made up of Big Ten and SEC teams. That's
what I was going to ask you.
ludicrous.
Joe says 2 SEC, 5 ACC. You know you're going to get 5 ACC. He said 4 Big Ten and 1 cupcake.
That's
4 Big Ten seems like a lot to me.
Yeah, that's excessive. Like, why would you do that to yourself?
Right.
Because you got.
that's basically the old schedule they were playing.
You got a chance of playing yourself right out of a playoff spot. And look, the goal is to get in the playoff, but the goal is also to be battle tested and be ready to go once you get into the playoff. So I would not do that because that's tough. That's tough.
Well, and there was a good one from Older Than Dirt on the Champions Lounge. He said 1 each from the SEC, Big 10, and Big 12, and make them from the middle of each conference, not necessarily the upper level. And that is something that we've kind of ignored, is the Big 12. And really,
the Big 12 is
Notre Dame traditionally has just not scheduled the Big 12.
That's true.
Now they've had Texas, they've had Oklahoma, yes. But outside of those, again, you're talking about, those are marquee games that you're talking about right there. And they've been, that varied obviously to different degrees in the years that Notre Dame has played them. But there are other big teams in the Big 12 that could. I kind of like what he's saying. So you're not like killing yourself by necessarily playing what you think is going to be an elite team from any of those conferences. But if you're in the middle of the conference in each of them, then as a major independent, you have done your job, I think, because you've got a cross sample where you're playing teams from the, the 3, basically all 4 major conferences, because the ACC would still be in that mix as well, because the 5 games you're going to get with them.
Well, and in Joe's particular scenario, there is Navy your cupcake. I mean, then there's people that don't want to play Navy, and I get that.
I mean, are we talking Navy? Are we talking MAC?
But like the reality is, they're not going to stop playing Navy. So
I think with his numbers, USC and Navy would be accounted for already.
Well, they wouldn't be accounted. I don't think so, because the Navy's not in one of those conferences.
No, but look, 2 SEC, 5 ACC, that's 7. Okay, never mind. Big 10 gets you 11. No, you're absolutely right. So there's no way that could happen anyway.
Right.
Because you've got to account for USC. You've got to account for USC and Navy. We still don't know what's going to happen with Stanford. Again, we'll get to that.
You notice I don't have Stanford on my list specifically.
No.
And you said
I don't think Stanford's a priority for either of us. But again, we'll get to that specifically in rapid fire in a little bit.
It's a great discussion to have, though, because I think there's a couple different ways you can go about it.
Beefeater was asking how you trade off what you were talking about with not being beat up at the end of the year.
Well, I don't want them playing a murderer's row either, Beef. I completely agree with that. You do have to be smart about the way you schedule and when you play certain teams and all of those different things. Like, that's all part of building a schedule, where you have your bye weeks, where you do certain things. And look, Notre Dame doesn't have to play a conference championship, so you've got that week off automatically. So you're going to have at least 2 to 3 weeks off before they have to play in a playoff game, right? So that's kind of where you have to heal up and all of those different things. No matter who you play, there's going to be bumps and bruises and injuries. That's just going to happen. And again, I think if you look at my model, let's say USC gets themselves back into a perennial power, right? So you might have one from the ACC, USC, maybe another one. So that's 3 big games. I think that's about the number that you want to average. You want to average 3 kind of marquee type games, and the rest should all be manageable, right? I think that's kind of what you aim for, and then I think you can get out.
See, I'm saying 2 marquee games, and the rest are manageable.
Well, and I think the key here is I think out of the 5 ACC, I think the odds are that you get maybe 1 marquee game out of that. You know what I mean? But you just you don't really know.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a question mark. I think you schedule 2, but you could get a third out of that ACC, slate, I guess. I wouldn't want more than 3, though.
Joe followed up with an excellent point, and I still don't think of USC as Big Ten yet.
I know.
We haven't seen him play in the Big Ten, but he's right. Like with his numbers, USC obviously would be part of that Big Ten group. And hadn't even thought about that.
Because they're not part of the Big Ten. It's so stupid, but whatever. They are part of the Big Ten.
But they will be. Yeah.
It's so dumb.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. But
so let's talk about a specific one, because there was another recent suggestion on the Champions Lounge. Home and home series with LSU. You buy or sell that?
You know what? Like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I would have bought it. I don't buy that anymore. Or until Brian Kelly leaves. Like there's just too much.
You don't want the circus.
I don't want the circus. I can't stand the circus. That's a really good one. And number 2, it's lose-lose. If you win, you should win. If you lose, it's the end of the world because you just lost to Brian Kelly.
Yep.
I don't see the benefit in playing LSU. There's 73 other SEC teams that you could pick and be fine.
Almost literally at this point.
That's what I'm saying.
Almost.
There's plenty of other options. LSU is not on my list. I'm sorry. For me, that petty ship has sailed. I will always be ready to make fun of Brian Kelly. I'm cool with that. I do not want Notre Dame to play them. I don't.
I agree. For the same reasons. I think what you're saying makes absolute sense, and I don't either. I mean, they're going to play Alabama in a few years. Like right now,
right?
Ole Miss would be just as attractive as LSU, as long as Ole Miss
even more
stays
so.
where they are. Even because
you got a high-powered offense against a high-powered defense. Like I would love that matchup.
They've played Tennessee before, so we have seen it, but it has been a while now. It's been going on 20 years, maybe even more than 20 years at this point since they played Tennessee. So I think that's one that you could put on there. And they're going to play Arkansas, but you also have Texas and Oklahoma going over to the SEC. And I would rather honestly see them play either one of those teams than LSU.
Sure. Well, and John's point, he buys it and he says, think about the box office. When was the last time Notre Dame didn't sell out? Like they don't have to think about the box office.
Well, there are plenty of those MAC type games that they're not selling out.
Fine.
I mean,
but LSU is not going to take the place of a MAC team.
Right.
They're going to take the place of one of those higher level teams. You know what I mean? And
that's my point. Like
that game's selling out regardless.
I'd rather see Texas or Oklahoma or Ole Miss. And I think Ole Miss would sell out as well.
Right.
Like I think that most of those SEC teams coming up now, you get to the bottom, like Missouri is better right now, but if Notre Dame were to schedule a home and home with Missouri, that's not. Yeah,
Missouri being really good is not sustainable.
Like if I was going to play Missouri, if I'm Notre Dame, going back to what I've said before, I would do it in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium.
Sure, right.
And Missouri might even want that because they're going to sell more tickets for a game like that.
Right.
Than they would out here.
Like playing LSU is right on par with seeing Taylor Swift in the stands. Like it's publicity at this point. Like it would be a talk show, dream, I suppose, and all of that stuff. But from a football standpoint, I don't see the benefit. I only see the negative side of it.
Is there a specific team you'd like to see him schedule a home and home with then?
I mean, you mentioned a bunch of them, to be perfectly honest with you. I would love to play Texas home and home. I know they've done that in the past, but I would love to see the Longhorns come up here to Notre Dame, and preferably when it's a little cooler outside. I think that would be a lot of fun. I like Oklahoma. I think that's a good matchup. It's got history. It's got relevance. I would love to see that particular matchup. You mentioned Tennessee. I think that's a good one as well. Fan bases and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a rabid fan base, and I know some people don't like Tennessee fans, and that's fine. One of our dear friends from back in the day, X-Man. I know I think his wife or he is a Tennessee fan. I forget. I'm over Ohio State. I'm good with Ohio State.
Yeah.
It's a pass for me. We just did that. It's time to find some new blood.
Yeah. I think Oregon would be at the top of my list.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Yeah.
Team they've never played, or at least recently anyway.
I look at it from a very selfish standpoint as well. Like, I would love to go out to Oregon and go to that stadium. You know what I mean? There's a lot of stadiums I would love to go to, and that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, me too. And with where Oregon is, right? Again, like if you're talking about marquee games, that's one that I think would be great.
I think it'd be fun, actually. And
exactly.
Oregon has, they're in the Big Ten now, but prior to now, they've shown that they're willing to come to the Midwest and play, and some of those early season games before they get into conference play and all that. And now they'll be here all the time. So,
Well, I'm trying to, like I'm looking at, like, and I know that you don't like Dion, but would Colorado make sense for a home and a home?
If Colorado can prove that they can get a little better on a consistent basis, then sure. Outside of that, there's history there, and that's part of my criteria. Like there is history there. I think it would be a bit of a circus as well, at least right now. I don't know that I want to prop up. This is Vince talking now. If I was making a schedule, I don't know that I would want to prop up a team that uses the transfer portal like he does. I know he's not doing anything against the rules, and I'm not saying that he is, but like turning over your entire roster almost.
But don't give him that extra platform, while he's still,
that's how I feel. If he can start to sustain something and get the team to be good on a regular basis without having to flush half the team every year, okay, I could get on board with that. But I just don't know that I'm ready to do that right now.
There aren't a whole lot of Big 12 teams that really like I wouldn't want them playing Kansas State. Decaf says bring on the Jayhawks. Like with Lance Leopold there right now, that kind of scares me as well. The way they've been trending the last few years. Like they played them. What year was that? 99, I think. That was the year before I got here. It was that Eddie Robinson Classic that they played, and Notre Dame just demolished Kansas. They haven't played them since then. I don't know. That'd be a little bit scarier to see them play that today.
That's fair. Where would your allegiances lie?
They would lie on the right side is where they would lie. See, Texas Tech, that does nothing for me. Father David says he would love Kansas State. You've never had to deal with Kansas State fans, obviously. So I would say no to that. That'd be a hard pass on that. TCU and Baylor, I think that there's maybe a little bit there.
Yeah. Utah's a good team. I mean, they've showed that they can sustain success. Like I wouldn't necessarily hate on a Utah matchup. That would be fine, I suppose. It doesn't. Again, that one doesn't really get my juices flowing, as they say.
Yeah.
I don't know. The Big 12 is going to have to, like the teams they brought in. I realize it takes a couple of years to recruit talent and all of those different things. They're going to have to step up their game a little bit. The Cincinnati's, the Central Floridas, I think, or whatever, whoever's all in the Big 12 now. Like, you're half your league is a Group of 5 team basically, and so they need to bring up the level of play a little bit before I want to schedule any really Big 12 teams. Somebody asked me why I don't have any Big 12 teams on my list, because I'm not that impressed with the Big 12 at the moment.
I mean, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12, there's, like I said, Notre Dame has not traditionally scheduled the Big 12 a lot, but when you look at what the majority of the Big 12 is, there's really no reason to. Iowa State doesn't do anything for me. They played them in a bowl game before.
That was a dud. I'm sorry, that game was a dud. I mean, everybody was talking about how good Iowa State was and all that. I mean, it was a blowout, if I remember correctly. Like, that game was over quickly.
Yeah.
You know, when Tony Jones is outrunning your defense, like, that game was over quickly.
I mean, honestly, and I get all the reasons you're talking about with Colorado, but Colorado's got about as much marquee appeal as anybody in the Big 12.
Yeah, you're
right
not
now.
wrong. Look,
Like
they would bring
Utah
eyeballs,
and
all that
BYU
stuff.
don't, they just played BYU, obviously.
True.
Utah, they haven't played, but that doesn't do a whole lot for me, unless they were going to play maybe Utah and Las Vegas or something like that,
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. Also
and that would be interesting. Like, if they wanted to get back out to Vegas again, maybe it is a Big 12 team. They take somebody,
and that part would make sense. Yeah, that part would make sense. I'd be all for like a Shamrock Series game or something like that out in Vegas. That'd be okay. I'd be okay with that. But yeah, I don't know that I want to prop up Colorado, man. They're just, in my opinion and Vince's opinion, they're everything that's wrong with college football right now. Again, not breaking any rules. They're doing it by the rule book. I would just, as a parent, like, you go there, you sign your letter of intent, you're there, and then they're like, no, you're out. We're revamping the whole room, or we're revamping half the team, and now you're right back to square one again. Like, I don't know, man. It just bothers me. It just bothers me.
Got a couple people who got in, joined late, only for a minute. Says Scott, thanks for the 2 years of great content. Scott, aka played like a champion today on the boards. All right. Sometimes the names in here don't match the names over there, so you never know exactly. Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate that. And Mike says you guys do this show with the fans better than anybody. IB is part of my day every day for the last 4 years.
Nice,
thank you
Mike.
very much. Appreciate that as well. With that, Vince, are you ready for rapid fire?
Woo! Let's go. Man, it's already after 6. Let's do this. It is.
I know. We've been rocking and rolling for a while here. We do have some other scheduled stuff we're going to get that Stanford thing in here in a second. But ESPN's Greg McElroy says Notre Dame is more desperate than Texas A&M to win their Week 1 matchup. He says, I don't think it's even close. I think by a mile it's Notre Dame. I think you look at Notre Dame this year. This is the year that Marcus Freeman has circled. So, do you buy or sell that? Is Notre Dame more desperate than Texas A&M in that Week 1 game?
I don't like the word desperate, but I think Notre Dame needs the win more. Like, so I buy the concept of the comment. I do, because if Texas A&M loses, it's expected. They should lose. Notre Dame's in year 3. Texas A&M is in year 1. They should lose. If Texas A&M wins, that surprises everybody. It's fantastic. Like, there's all the positives if they win, but nobody's expecting them to win outside of the state of Texas, right? And so Notre Dame absolutely has to win this game. They should win this game. Top to bottom on this roster, Notre Dame is better than Texas A&M. I'm ecstatic that it's game 1 and not game 11, but Notre Dame should win this game. I 100% agree with Greg McElroy on the concept of his opinion. I just, the quote desperate.
The choice of word is the bad.
I don't like that.
Yeah, I could. Here are some synonyms of desperate: hopeless, anguished, distress, in despair, suicidal, miserable, wretched, desolate, forlorn, disheartened, discouraged. I don't like like desperate.
That's not the right word.
And that's what jumps out in the headline when you see this is the use of the word desperate. Do they need it more? Yeah, like for them, if Notre Dame has eyes on being in the college football playoff, which they do, in which they should, with everything that they've got lined up, just like, like you said, the spirit of what he's saying, I buy. The specific choice of word, desperate, I'm selling that, because I don't think they are again, because that leads you to believe that somehow it's like, oh, Notre Dame is like they're struggling by some means, and they've got to have this win, and if they don't, it's the end of the world, and that kind of thing. It won't be the end of the world. It would not be good for Notre Dame's college football playoffs hopes.
Sure,
but it won't be the end of the world. But I do think they need it a little bit more because of specifically what he's saying. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you got to basically go perfect the rest of the way if you're going to get in.
The margin of error.
Because of what we started talking about at the start of this, because of the schedule, how soft it is the rest of the way, that's why you've got to have it. But I think, desperate, there's a connotation there that you're going to be in some sort of frenetically bad frame of mind going into that game.
Yeah, and they don't need to play desperate. They just need to play their game and they'll be fine. Like that.
Right.
And that's the thing about this game. And what worries me, because you can look at a schedule in the offseason and you can decide who the big games are and all of those different things. My fear is that this is the big game. Like the Texas A&M game ends up when we're looking back on the schedule, the Texas A&M game ends up being the biggest game of the year. Whether they win, lose, draw, whatever, that the Texas A&M game ends up being the biggest game of the year because, USC kind of takes a step back because they're trying to figure out the quarterback position and there isn't a Louisville from last year, or however you want to parse your way through the schedule, Texas A&M could potentially be the biggest game of the year, and it's game one. And so the best thing that could happen to Notre Dame is they beat Texas A&M, no doubt, by a couple scores or more, right? And then all of a sudden, Texas A&M, it gets better and better and better as the year goes on. They get a couple of upset victories, and all of a sudden they're riding high at the end of the year. And then Notre Dame can look back and be like, hey, we smoked those guys, and that's a huge, roster boost, schedule boost, strength of schedule boost for Notre Dame. But
right.
I just fear, even if they win this game, that becomes the biggest game of the year. And I don't know that that's.
And then where do you go from there? Can you are you going to have some kind of slip up along the way? And that's kind of what Brent's saying. And again, I just think that saying desperate means that they're going to be in some sort of grab bagging, mode going in. The whole thing is it's a season opener, new head coach for one side. As Marcus Freeman said recently, confidence is the key. Just play the game.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. You don't have to feel like it's all on the line in this game.
And look, we've talked about this 100 times. It's a big year for Marcus Freeman, and it's an even bigger moment for him going on the road, probably the most hostile environment that you're going to be in all season. How does the team look? Do they look flat like they did last year when they went to Louisville? Or do they come out ready to prove who they are in game one? I mean, that's the biggest question mark going into that game.
Yeah. So Brent says, basically, if it's a given that Notre Dame is 11-1, who do they lose to?
I don't know. It's college football. That's the thing. Like, they could lose to anybody on their schedule. They've proven that.
Honestly, I feel like if they're going to lose one, it's going to be the game that we just talked about, most likely because of the way the rest of the schedule sets up. But you're absolutely right. It is college football. And we've been, the consistency from week to week, game to game is one of the things that we're looking at for Marcus Freeman going into this season. And that's that's the thing that's still got to solve itself this year.
I still have a hard time, believing that Notre Dame lost to Marshall and Stanford a couple years ago. Like that still doesn't seem real. You could replay that game 1,000 times. Notre Dame wins 999 of them, and they lost the one to both, right? And that's still unfathomable. Nobody would have looked at that schedule and pinpointed those two games that Notre Dame would lose that season. That's why looking at the schedule ahead of time this year, I mean, they could lay an egg anywhere. The ball bounces a weird, funny way. You're playing in a typhoon, whatever the case may be. I know we have to do it because it's our job, but like looking through the schedule, it's hard to find a loss. And I get that, but I also have a hard time thinking that they're going to go 12-0.
Right.
So
I still think they're going to win that game. But the Texas A&M,
I do too.
That we're talking about.
I love the matchups in that game, to be honest with you.
But because it's an opener, and so many things can happen in the opener, and as you said, you're going to look different in that opener than you are a month later, and then obviously by game 12 as well. But just looking at everything on paper right now, I like them quite a bit.
Me too. Yeah, me too. Like I said, I love the matchups, and we'll break that down as we get closer. But there are very few places where Texas A&M is better than Notre Dame going into that game. There's a couple, but Notre Dame has the advantage in a lot of other places.
Fill in the blank. It's blank that according to Pro Football Focus, Notre Dame's Mike Denbrock is the highest paid offensive coordinator in the land at $2.1 million a year.
It's freaking awesome that Notre Dame is paying their coordinators what they're paying their coordinators. It's awesome. That's the blank. It's awesome. I love that, because how long have we talked in the 20 years that we've been doing this together? How many times have we talked about the fact that Notre Dame refuses to pay their assistant coaches, right? It's been forever until they hired Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator. That's where the tide finally started to shift. And now they've got the highest paid guy in the land, and that is awesome. It's just one of those negative recruiting things that you can just cross off the list. It doesn't work anymore.
Well, and this was one of the bigger obstacles Notre Dame had to overcome a few years back when you're trying to compete with those elite teams in the SEC. And not just what you're going to pay the head coach, but what can you pay your top assistant coaches? To be competitive, not just with your schedule, but to be competitive nationally and, to be in the mix and mentioned in the same sentence with the Georgias and Alabamas of the world, had to be able to pay your assistant coaches, appropriately. And now they are. And the fact that not only is Mike Denbrock the highest paid offensive coordinator in the country, you literally also took him away from one of those SEC schools that's just 5 years removed from a national championship themselves. And not that he was the offensive coordinator then, but you get the picture. Like, it's important for what you're talking about to be appropriately considered and to be able to get the best people on your coaching staff. You had to be willing to make this kind of investment. So I think it's awesome that to go from where they were and kind of how they viewed that not that long ago to having two of the best coordinators in the country and also two of the best compensated coordinators in the country is very important for Notre Dame's success.
Because look, I firmly believe that Mike Denbrock probably could have made more money staying at LSU, but Notre Dame got it close enough to where he made it a decision where I want to be at Notre Dame more than I want to be at LSU, and I'm not taking a massive pay cut to do it. It was at least in the neighborhood of whatever LSU was going to throw at him. Because look, at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that LSU, if there was a bidding war, LSU would have won. Like I believe that's the case, but Notre Dame was close enough that money wasn't the be all end all.
Right. But also remember when Notre Dame, when Brian Kelly originally got Marcus Freeman here, who was he negotiating against? He was also negotiating against LSU at that point, and they were able to step up and get Marcus Freeman more compensation here to get him here to begin with as well. So
just LSU. See, we don't need to play LSU. They've already taken all the L's at this point. Got Marcus Freeman. We stole Mike Denbrock. We gave him Brian Kelly. Like, those are all L's for LSU, people. Okay, these are all W's for Notre Dame. We don't need to play them on the field. We're defeating them off the field.
That's right. So fill in the blank. We got the news last week, of course. We talked about Notre Dame adding Boise State to the home schedule. One opponent that is still up in the air for next year is Stanford, because the contract with the Cardinal expires after this season, and Stanford is now part of the ACC. So we don't know if they're going to be on the 2025 schedule, and it will be blank if the Irish don't play Stanford next year.
A breath of fresh air if they don't play Stanford next year. Like, look, I'm fine with them going into the ACC rotation. They're part of the ACC. That's fine. Put them into the rotation, and you'll play them, 2 times every 5 to 7 years or whatever the case may be. I'm totally fine with that. That's totally cool. We've got that agreement with the ACC. Awesome. There's no need to play Stanford every single year.
I completely agree with that.
It's just not necessary, man. If anything, it hurts your strength of schedule right now.
Yeah, it does now. And I don't think Stanford is ever going to be, I don't want to say ever, but
it's close.
Within the next 15 years even, I don't think that they're going to be what they were in the peak time, the end of Harbaugh and the peak David Shaw years. I just don't think they're going to get back to that again. And so for that reason, I realize why Notre Dame kind of, has the philosophy that they're talking about, like-minded institutions and,
Sure.
academic institutions and all that different kind of stuff. And I mean, Stanford has questions to answer in terms of, do they want to remain a big-time athletic institution, or do they essentially want to be an Ivy League program? I think that's the biggest question they're going to have to answer in the next decade. And it's never done that much for me. The biggest thing that it really seemed to accomplish was you had a partner with USC because of that want to get out to the West Coast every year. But, as we've talked about on this show before, Vince, how much benefit was there really to get to Northern California as opposed to USC in Southern California in that every other year? It just never really seemed like there was that much benefit getting out to Stanford. And so I agree. Like, I will be curious to see if, especially because of sort of because of that factor, if Notre Dame would do a one-off, because next year is supposed to be the year that they go out to Stanford, and like how much of a priority will that continue to be for next year?
Sure.
Even if the ACC is going to kind of make them, be a part of the rotation as opposed to an every year thing. But the other possibility is still, and there are some, I believe it's the Carolina schools are doing this to some extent, or at least some of the Carolina schools. Like, would Notre Dame, would Stanford become part of the ACC rotation versus would Notre Dame essentially sign Stanford, as a non-conference, quote unquote, kind of opponent to keep them on the schedule?
Yeah, that would be a disappointment if that ends up being the
case.
I would be very disappointed, because I think there's other teams that you can play. They can help you out much more than going to Northern California every other year, number one, from a location standpoint. And then just from a strength of schedule standpoint, look, DK says Stanford will improve under their head coach. Okay, awesome. I get it. I could walk around the block and improve my weight by 3 ounces. That doesn't, it's an improvement.
They can improve, but how much improvement are they going to do?
That's what
are they going to be an average team? Are they going to be, better than Vanderbilt? Or are they going to be Vanderbilt, essentially?
And that's the thing. Like, do you really want to tie yourself to that continuously moving forward? And the fact that they haven't re-upped that contract at this point, I think hopefully I'm projecting. I'm hoping that means that they're thinking about other options.
So if you're Notre Dame, what should they do with their schedule if Stanford's not going to be on it every year? If they're just going to go into the ACC rotation,
right?
Do you still prioritize getting out to the West Coast every year, where where like USC is always going to be there and they're always going to alternate USC? But what about, again, next year they're supposed to go to Stanford Thanksgiving weekend. So what do you do with that part of the schedule? What do you do with Thanksgiving weekend now if Stanford's not on it and you've only got USC every other year out there?
Well, number one, I'm okay with having a different game over Thanksgiving weekend. Okay, so even if it's a home game for Notre Dame.
Again, there was never that much appeal for Notre Dame and Stanford for that Thanksgiving weekend. Like Notre Dame USC Thanksgiving weekend.
Yes.
That's a game that people want to see that weekend.
Absolutely.
Notre Dame Stanford, it's just like, we're going to put it on the Pac-12 network. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay,
exactly.
Thanks, Fubo, or whatever.
I would be okay with some sort of a Big Ten rotation. Get the Purdue's, the Michigan States. And like you said, Oregon's game. Oregon, if you want to get out to the West Coast, play Oregon, play Washington, maybe get kind of a rotation there. I would be okay with that. That still gets you out to the West Coast if that's a priority for you, which I'm not so sure this day and age that it is. Maybe it is. If that's the case, there are other options that can get you out to the West Coast.
UCLA,
Big Ten team.
I still think, again, even though UCLA is not even, traditionally as good, that would, Notre Dame played a home and home those 2 years with UCLA. Again, it's going on 20 years, but like between UCLA and Oregon and Washington, those are 3 teams that I think you could easily swap out and just do them on a rotating basis with some
And
kind of home and home. And
it doesn't
you'd get to different parts of the West Coast as well.
Exactly. And it doesn't need to be Thanksgiving weekend either, by the way. It can be anywhere in the schedule that fits. You can, like I said, you can play your last home game of the year on Thanksgiving break here at home. I have no problem with that. You know what I mean?
They wouldn't
As long
always
as you're
have to be traveling Thanksgiving weekend either. Yeah.
I would think that would be something that Notre Dame and or anybody that has anything to do with Notre Dame football would enjoy, maybe being in town for Thanksgiving weekend.
I mean, and this is an interesting one too. Again, Miami is part of the ACC rotation, but if you could work with the ACC to help you out, going to Miami for Thanksgiving weekend wouldn't be a bad trip either. And if you're going to put that in Thanksgiving weekend, again, Miami is Miami. They're supposed to be getting better, but there's still going to be more brand name appeal. Notre Dame playing Miami, like Saturday night Thanksgiving weekend, than Notre Dame playing Stanford, right?
100%.
I think I think that there are a lot more teams that would make that game much more attractive from a TV standpoint than Stanford would be. I think as somebody's pointed out, like John B is saying, their field is a minefield, talking about Stanford, and they don't even sell it out. Even in the years where they were really good, they weren't always selling that out when Notre Dame would go out there.
Yep, exactly. And I just don't see the benefits of Stanford. I just don't. And people can say, "Oh, get you out to the West Coast. It's Northern California." Like, no, I don't think that does what you think it does.
Yeah. I mean, this DK brings up a good question with Oregon, though. Will they be more reluctant to schedule more Midwest teams for their out of conference?
That's a good question.
That is like them in Washington, because now they're going to have to do all this traveling just to play their conference.
And I'm sure they're trying to feel it out at this point, because they don't know what that's going to be like. This is going to be their first year in the Big Ten. They don't know what that is going to entail. And so I would imagine they probably would be fairly reluctant to schedule Midwest teams. But remember, we're not even talking. I mean, it should be a home and home, but that's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about Notre Dame going out there.
Now,
so worst case scenario, it's just a home game. It's a one-off.
Now, this is a good point from Mark. He says, no way the administration will ever want a Thanksgiving weekend home game. And I mean, It is valid. What? Because you're on Thanksgiving break. Everyone goes home for Thanksgiving. Are the students going to be back in time for
games? There's been plenty of games, though, that they've had over fall break when there's no students.
But would you want that? And the weather's not always going to be great.
They've done it. I mean, they've done it. You just sell more tickets to the people in town. I don't know. I mean, I wonder if they think like that. I'll just say that.
I don't know. I'm sure they think about a lot of things, but I don't know what.
I just don't know. I don't know if they think about the right things.
I don't know if that what that specific take would be, just because of the fact that they've never had, they haven't had to deal with it for 20 plus years.
True.
But that's the other thing to remember as well. Like, this agreement only went into place where they started doing this swap. I think it was the end of the 90s. Like the tail end of the 90s was when they started that. So it's like 25 plus years at this point. So they've been doing it for a while, but it's not like they've always done it. This is still a relatively new thing.
Right.
So Boston College, I know I've mentioned this before. Boston College was I believe Thanksgiving weekend. That was the regular season finale that year, 1993. The week after Florida State. Those were both home games.
Plenty of people in the stands for that one, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
Just throwing it out there.
That's right. So, Vince, kind of a bombshell this afternoon. According to D1Baseball.com, former Notre Dame and LSU baseball coach Paul Mainieri is expected to be named the new head coach at South Carolina. What do you think about this development?
Huge opportunity missed for Notre Dame. That's what I'll say. Huge opportunity missed. I think, and I'm joking slightly, but not really, because I don't think that Sean Stifler necessarily should be let go. He's only been here for 2 years. It's just not trending in the right direction, in my opinion. He's firing some of his staff. There's issues there, right? And so if I'm the athletic director at Notre Dame, which I'm clearly not, and I know, and I hear that Paul Mainieri is sniffing around other jobs, I'm picking up the telephone and I'm asking him, what are the chances we can get you back up to Notre Dame? If he's willing to go to the SEC and coach baseball, that means he's still got it in his blood and he still wants it, and he still wants it at a high level. I think this is an opportunity missed for Notre Dame. I'll just say it.
I do as well. With how things were traded, that would be the way things went this year. And I realize the guy that you've got is under contract, but as I've said, next year is make or break for Sean Stifler at Notre Dame. And he seems like a really good guy and all that, in terms of the results. I think it's TBD at this point.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Paul Mainieri is a guy who left Notre Dame, loving Notre Dame. There were a myriad of reasons that he left Notre Dame. It worked out well for him. He won a national championship at LSU, went to the College World Series several times. He was runner-up in 2017 at LSU. And I mean, the reason he retired to begin with is he had some neck, like some cervical issues, and he was having some really bad migraine headaches and just, a lot of, quality of life things relatively soon after the surgery were not where he wanted them to be. So he got out of coaching. And, I think after being away for a little bit, he obviously missed it, but at the same time, his body healed up as well, and I think that he is in a different place physically right now. He's 66, so it's not like he's over the hill in terms of coaching. He only, coached a couple of years ago. He was in the mix at Miami last year. He interviewed down there last year. And I remember we talked about it here and we're like, please don't go to Miami. Please don't go to Miami. So now he could end up at South Carolina. And I don't know. Obviously wish him well. And it's funny because we started the show talking about this is the 1-year anniversary of the show. He was actually the first guest that we had on the show as well. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
But we had him on for that show 2 years ago. And, we talked about Link Jarrett and all the success he had and, a lot of different things in that interview. So obviously wish Paul well, but, I really, and I said it to him that day, I think that you can win at Notre Dame, but it has to be the right person. And Paul Mainieri showed that he was the right person. If you go way back when Pat Murphy showed that he was the right person. Pat never got, Notre Dame to the College World Series. Mainieri did. Link Jarrett got Notre Dame to the College World Series. Like, it has to be the right person. And we found out relatively quickly that Link Jarrett was the right person. And unfortunately, again, you expected there to be some drop-off after you had a guy like Link Jarrett, but you don't expect to tie the program record for fewest wins in ACC play in a single season just 2 years after you were in the College World Series. So, but I'm still just, I'm shocked, but not shocked that Mainieri is going to end up at South Carolina because he's going to go he's going to go to an SEC power, it sounds like. And like I mentioned earlier, South Carolina's athletic director, Ray Tanner, is the guy who was the head baseball coach when they won back-to-back national championships a few years back. So the guy knows baseball. And if he's going after Paul Mainieri, he obviously knows that he's going to get himself a really good baseball coach.
Oh my gosh, yes. You've got his number. Tell him he hasn't signed anything yet.
That's right.
Tell him, Notre Dame, call him up. Let's do it.
DK wants to know why baseball managers stood up like they're going to get into the game. I mean, he said, can you imagine football coaches suited up?
I mean, look, baseball coaches aren't wearing equipment. So, I mean, there is a bit of a difference there. It's not like, lacrosse coaches wear the helmet and all of that stuff. Baseball coaches, all they wear is the pants. Let's be honest. Like, they could wear the jersey, but most of the time they're wearing a sweatshirt or they're wearing a pullover or, something along those lines. They wear the pants. It's just how it's always been done. And I realize that's not a good reason. But when I was a head baseball coach, man, I would get ribbing from people, and I would tell my buddy who was the swim coach, just be lucky it's not like that in your sport, buddy.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Decaf says Notre Dame needs major upgrades at the EC. I mean, they've done some pretty good upgrades just in terms of the team stuff, the team rooms and the clubhouse and all those different things. They've done really good things in there. The fan experience at the EC. I mean, one of the issues is if you build it, are they even going to come? Just because of where you are. And if you don't have a product you can put on the field, what difference does it make what the facility looks like? And unfortunately, you're back to what's the product going to be? That's where you are right now with Notre Dame baseball in 2 short years. And in the meantime, Link Jarrett's going back to the College World Series. And South Carolina is going to be back in the World Series again pretty soon. If they're hiring Paul Maneri, I have no doubt about that. So,
no doubt.
Caitlin Clark left off the U.S. women's Olympic basketball team over the weekend. Vince, which do you have the bigger issue with? Clark's snub or the avalanche of takes that came after it this weekend?
I haven't heard many of the takes. I will
say
that.
Well, you stayed off Twitter then, obviously, because Twitter was flooded with Caitlin Clark takes. Some of them good, some of them bad, all weekend long.
Whether she deserves to be on the team or doesn't deserve to be on the team, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like a lot of people talking about a missed opportunity from a marketing standpoint. NBC has to be mad because they're not going to have Caitlin Clark, all that kind of stuff. I guess if you haven't seen it, look.
Yeah, help me out here.
There are only 12 players who get to go.
Correct.
Right? So 12 is a very select amount. And I realize that Caitlin Clark was the best college player in the nation. But there are a lot of, very deserving professional players who are going to be over there. Like Arike Agumbawale, she is one of the, she and Clark both went to this. They only took 14 players to the tryout, I guess.
Okay.
Agumbawale and Clark are the two who didn't make it. You can definitely say, well, why does Diana Taurasi at 40 years old or whatever she is at this point, why is she still on the team? Because Clark actually has better numbers than Diana Taurasi right now.
Well, and Clark's not having a great rookie year, by the way. So I could get on board with the fact that she didn't make the team based on maybe how she's playing or, something along those lines. Because, look, basketball is a streaky kind of a game. Right. And if you're not playing well, who's to say you're going to continue not playing well, when you get over to the Olympics and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't really have an issue with the snub. I mean, that's just the coach's decision or whatever. You should not make the team just based on who you are in a off the court scenario. Now, your point about Diana Taurasi, though, I would take Caitlin Clark over Diana Taurasi. Diana Taurasi's she's over the hill. It's time to pass the torch.
Right. I mean, if you're saying that, people who are making the argument, well, are you only taking Caitlin Clark for the name? At this point, you're really only taking Diana Taurasi for the name and the reputation.
That is correct.
That she has.
Now, I think if I'm sitting there as a coach and let's say Caitlin Clark is like my 10th, 11th, 12th best player, right? Do I take her on the team and let her ride the pine the entire time and deal with the thousands of questions that are going to come as to why she's not playing?
Well, and that was, I think, one of the justifications for not taking her. Okay. And I do think that because of the lightning rod that Caitlin Clark is right now, if you're the coach of that team and then you've got to deal with, the decision on how much Caitlin Clark is going to play versus is she going to sit, I honestly think it would just be a bigger distraction right now.
That was exactly my point. 100%. Is that something as a coach?
You've already got all this petty jealousy across, the league, whether these players want to admit it or not. Right. There's already that. Why just compound it just to say you're taking Caitlin Clark? Make her earn it 4 years from now. She'll be a different player 4 years from now.
100%. And these over the hill players will be hopefully gone by then as well. And then she'll be one of the elite players, I'm guessing, on that team 4 years from now, right? I mean, but if she's just going to sit the bench, I would rather just not have her on the team, to be honest with you, because I don't want to deal with all that. They're dealing with it now, but they'll deal with it for a new cycle, and then they can move on and try to go win gold and not have to worry about those a million questions. I get it. I get it.
There's obviously a case for her being deserving, but at the same time, I just feel, again, one, like to answer my own question, the avalanche of takes, it's just, it's like, you don't have to have a take on everything, and you knew, because even if she had made the team, there was going to be an avalanche of takes about, oh, you're only taking her because NBC
absolutely.
and you want ratings and everything else. And, it's like, but there is something to the fact as well, like if you want to keep playing, like both sides of the argument, there is something to the fact that not only have the women like won all these gold medals at the Olympics in women's basketball, they haven't even lost a game in the Olympics in 30 years, so you could literally probably take players, what would that be, like 25 through 36 or what, like
you probably go win it still.
Yeah, and still go win. So, like how much it really matters in terms of, are you taking the best of the best? But again, I just feel like one way or another, if Caitlin Clark isn't out there probably getting at least 12 minutes a game, that would become its own thing. And how much do you really need to deal with that once the Olympics start? So,
yep, agreed.
So game 2 of the NBA Finals included 600 lobsters in the media dinner at Boston's TD Garden Arena last night. One, we've never gotten lobster that I can recall at a media pregame.
No.
What's the best media meal you've ever
had?
Easy.
This is easy. You know exactly where I'm going with this.
I think I do.
Nelson's Chicken. 100%.
Nelson's Chicken pregame. Yes. Bruno's Pizza halftime.
Yes.
You don't have to give me, like, I would take the lobster, but you don't have to give me lobster.
Oh.
Those were the golden days.
Those were the golden days, man. And remember the strategy that we would come up with to make sure we got Bruno's at halftime? Like, we were scoping out another floor and, like, waiting for it to come in and then just hitting it hard. And then, because none of the media knew where this other place was that they would drop the Bruno's. And, like, oh, those were the good old days, man. And I would play like tricks with myself and not eat any of the chicken until Notre Dame scored a touchdown. And there were games where that was a real problem back in the day. And, oh, it's so good. You just walk up and there's a guy with a giant glove and he's just like, here, have a half a chicken. Like, it was, I mean, those were the days, man.
Oh, man. No kidding.
It has taken a severe turn for the worse.
You're making me hungry just thinking about it.
I know, right? You can smell it. You can taste it.
I know.
Oh, it's so good. So good.
So awesome. So awesome.
So good.
So going back to the scheduling thing, see if you can work out alternating USC and UCLA. And, like I said, I think UCLA is a substitute for Stanford. I think that's
I would take that in a heartbeat.
Been a more deniable or a more desirable game. Yeah.
I'll take that in a heartbeat. 100%. I would take that in a heartbeat. And at least, even if UCLA is up and down from a competitive standpoint, at least the Southern California market is one that you would want to be in.
Yep, exactly.
From a recruiting standpoint, yeah.
DJ was asking about women's basketball play-by-play. That is the plan in terms of me for next year. So looking forward to another year of that. And we had Olivia Miles on the show a few weeks ago. Remember, you can always dial that up. Go back in the podcast feed or on YouTube. Stay tuned tomorrow. Another big guest lined up. I don't like to say the names.
I know. I think I saw the name. Did I see the name in a prepared room?
You probably did.
When I was getting
backstage?
In? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
For once, I know the name.
So we got a big one lined up for tomorrow. Ryan Roberts will be here. We'll talk a little recruiting as well, but interview planned to go for tomorrow. As long as everything goes to plan, to schedule.
That's right. I'll be out of town, so I can't bail you out.
That's right. Ryan will be here. Jesse will be here for rapid fire.
There we
as
go.
Well. Vince, enjoyed it as always.
Yeah,
Thanks again for the last, going on 20 years, but the last 2 years specifically.
Right. 2 years and hour and 40 minutes. Like, we were rolling today.
Man, no kidding. We did.
It's good stuff.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Of course, appreciate you jumping in for the 2-year anniversary of the show. Hit the like button before you leave, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.